what separates a disciple who grows from one who plateaus? Well, there are a lot of things, but one that is often overlooked is effective tools for helping people grow and pass on the faith. So today I'm joined by Jim McKnight, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite tools, why tools are important, and how to get the most out of them. Jim, welcome back onto the show. You've been on a few times. It's always great to talk with you. You are one of the guys who is absolutely in the harvest. When I think of someone who's at the tip of the spear, making disciples, using things like we're going to talk about today, tools for passing on the faith, you are definitely near the top of the list. So appreciate you making time and coming on to share with us today. It's an honor to be here. Tell us a little bit about your background. Some folks are going to be seeing you for the first time. So where are you at now? How long have you been following Jesus? And maybe how long have you been passionate about making disciples?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. My family, my wife, Rolinda, and our 5 children live outside of Columbus, Georgia. Our ministry is primarily to the U.S. Army, and that's why we're in this area. I've been walking with Jesus about 25 years. I trusted Christ. I knew about Jesus before I joined the Army, but about 2 years into my time in the Army is when I would say that I trusted him to be the Lord of my life. And I came in pretty fast. And about a year after that decision, I learned to start making disciples and began trying to use some tools at that point. So that's a little bit of my story. It's been great walking with Jesus.
Yeah, well, I know I'm passionate about tools. I think I'm probably overly passionate about tools. I kind of nerd out on ways of passing on the faith, which I don't think everyone needs to be. And that's not where we're going with this conversation today. In fact, let me give folks an idea of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about what tools are, why they're important. Then Jim and I are going to share just 2 or 3 of our favorite tools that have been effective over the years at helping people grow in their faith, walk with Jesus, and pass on their faith. And then we're going to finish up by explaining what tools can and what tools cannot do. Because again, guys like me can get really excited about tools, and sometimes we could put more trust in them than we should. So that's kind of the flow of the conversation. We hope you guys will stick with us to the end. We'll have links to some of these tools in the video description here on YouTube and in the show notes for the podcast. But let's start there, Jim, with just explaining what we mean by a tool for disciple making and why we think they're important. So how would you explain what a tool for making disciples is?
Yeah, I think the tool needs to be defined in relation to what a principle is, or what a biblical command is, or a function, we might call it. And so those things are like biblical mandates that if you're a disciple, you have to, believe in, and that you have to try to practice. So an example of that would be that if you are a disciple, you're part of the church, the universal church. You can't reject that notion. That's a principle. And a function you need to participate in is to gather with the body somehow, some way. So now a tool might be a way that you do that, or a form. So I think of the form as a way you might do it, and a tool in particular. My definition would be a packaged form that's intended to be easily reproduced, and transformational. It should help you grow, become more like Jesus, and easily reproduced. That's what you're shooting for when you use and evaluate tools. I'm curious, what's your definition? How would it differ?
Yeah, I don't know if it would differ too much from that. I would describe a tool as a way of packaging and delivering and helping someone practice truth. So I kind of think of all 3 of those ingredients as being part of what I think of the value of a tool. So it's something that helps package truth. It's not necessarily the truth itself. It's a way of putting handles on truth so that people can grab it. It's also a way of passing it on. And I think this is why it's so important for disciple making, because we can have a ton of great theology in our heads, and we can ourselves be practicing following Jesus in really deep and meaningful ways. And what a tool does is it helps bring that into a more pass-onable package so that you can communicate it, not comprehensively, but faithfully, in a way that a younger believer can grab hold of and then finally practice. We want to help people. So I think of tools as great ways of passing on the faith in a 101 manner. I mean, I'm sure there's more complex tools out there as well, but that's not going to be the heart of what we're talking about today. We want to talk about those really basic tools that help you package, pass on, and help young disciples practice the truth of our Christian faith. So that's kind of the way I would describe a tool as we're going to do it today.
Yeah, that's good. And I like your sense of how we're going to do it today. I think it helps to think about even a Sunday morning sermon as a tool. So a pastor can put 40 hours into that, create that message, and then deliver it. So it is a way to communicate truth to people. We don't usually think of it as a tool because it's not very easy to reproduce. But I think one of the things that will help us evaluate, are our tools really good? If that's the primary way that you're trying to pass on truth, you just have to realize my way is not very reproducible. It probably takes some advanced training to be able to put that message together and then package it. And you got to ask yourself as a disciple maker, am I comfortable with that if that is my go-to tool? So yeah, I know the tools today we're going to be thinking of terms of reproducibility, but every tool is, I can recreate the spaceship and go to the moon with enough time, energy, and money, but that might take my life's work to reproduce that one time. Do I want to be about that is the question we got to ask ourselves as disciple makers.
Right. And again, we're going to be talking about tools that you can start using right away and that young believers can grab hold of and find benefit from. Because sometimes I think, there are, even in the mechanical world, in the industrial world, there are very simple tools and there are complex tools. So for instance, a tape measure is a tool that will help you measure distances. A caliper is another tool that will help you measure in a much more precise way. It's really doing the same job, but at a more complex and refined level. And so it's the same way in discipleship. We want to have those simple tools. I think sometimes the reasons why we struggle with making disciples is because as leaders, we can be operating with this caliper level mindset, and we're trying to use caliper level tools, but young believers need the tape measure. So yes, we want these depth, and sometimes a sermon can be that way. A sermon can be very deep, but maybe in a way that doesn't really help people who are hearing it. So we always want to match the tool with the person that we're trying to help. And Jesus was a master of using tools. So let's start with him. He is our example par excellence. I'm reading in Mark's gospel, and I'm in chapter 4 right now. And I just read the parable of the sower. And of course, Jesus tells this parable to a great crowd. And then afterward, a group come to him privately, and they ask him to explain the meaning to him. And Jesus tells them, to you it's been given to know the secrets of the kingdom, but to those who are outside, they receive everything in parables. And so the parables were one of the tools Jesus used to package and pass on truth, and even point people towards how to apply that truth in their lives. What do you think about how Jesus used tools and his example? What can we learn from him?
Yeah, he is the example par excellence on how to use tools. And I think about, he had less resources available to him. He didn't have, recordings and things like we're using now. He had to tell stories. And the stories are meant to highlight a truth, but they're also meant to conceal. And so one of the things he's doing with his tool in the parable of the sower is provoking interest. At the end of Mark 4 there, after several parables are given, in verse 33, it says, with many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them as much as he could understand, as much as they could understand. But he did not explain anything to them. But when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. And so his tools were magnificent for provoking interest and then drawing people into deeper discussions. And I think that's a less recognized thing about Jesus, that his parables, I think people think, oh, they're an agrarian society, so he taught agrarian parables. But so to make it easy for them to understand, actually, he did it to conceal some things and to provoke interest. I'm not suggesting that we should apply that. I think I naturally confuse things a lot when I'm trying to teach and explain things, so I try to be clear, but just to understand that that's what he was about.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And I think there is a principle there, which is effective tools capture interest and hopefully spark a deeper participation by those who are hearing the tool or learning from us, that would provoke them to explore further. Jesus did a similar thing with hyperbole, just as a teaching mechanism. I don't know if I would say it's a tool, but his whole point there was to say something very provocative that would immediately generate interest, maybe even anger or opposition. But he definitely didn't bore people with. And so when we think about tools, we want to think about engagement. What is going to be, again, meeting this person where they're at, but also hopefully drawing them into a deeper pursuit of God and his truth. Well, any other things that you would say, Jim, on this introductory part of what tools are and why they're important?
I think that's a good start. I'm curious to hear about what some of your favorite tools are, and maybe with a couple of examples, we can build off of that and evaluate the tools and see if they're getting the job done. Yeah,
I hope so too. I think we will. There's so many tools that we could go into. I haven't even fully decided which ones I'm going to spotlight here. But, I would say just from my own experience, maybe we can finish up this section just by maybe just in a testimonial way, share how tools made a difference in my life. And I know for me, when I first began to follow Jesus, I was very young in life. I was 20 years old, but I had grown up in the Bible Belt. I definitely heard a lot of the stories from the Bible. So I had a familiarity with the content of Christianity, the heartbeat of Christianity. And yet, when I began to follow Jesus and truly believe in, belong to him, and seek to become like him, I didn't really know what to do, which is kind of ironic. And I take full responsibility for that. That was on me. I had failed to discern what it was that I was supposed to do. One of the ways I would say it is that I had a very clear idea of the thou shalt nots. The ways that I had been living before following Christ that I needed to stop doing. But I didn't have a clear picture of the thou shalts. What is it that it would look like to follow Jesus, to seek him? And so I was praying and asking God to guide me to older believers who could help me begin to piece that together. And eventually the Lord brought Cecil Bean into my life. And I can still remember the first time that Cecil invited me to grab lunch with him. I didn't really know what to expect because this was really a first experience for me, meeting up with an older believer. And so he shared a simple illustration, a tool called the pipeline. And we still use it. I call it the map to maturity now, because that's really what it is. It describes how someone starts off as a young believer, as a baby in the faith, and how we're supposed to grow to maturity. But it really plots that out. And this is where you start. This is what elementary growth looks like. This is what more advanced growth looks like. This is what maturity looks like. This is what's supposed to happen when you're mature. So it really is a map. At least that's how I think of it. And it blew me away. And I have to say, I left that lunch ecstatic. I was so encouraged. I was so inspired because finally someone had been able to put on, I think it was literally a napkin at Shoney's restaurant. If you guys are in the South, you know what Shoney's is about. But someone had been able to write out where I could look at it and I could see in one simple little napkin what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And that's powerful. Like if you can do that, and I was looking for it. That's the thing, is like Cecil didn't have to persuade me of it. He basically tapped into work that God was already doing in my life. But because he had this tool, he could apply that tool to my life, to my situation. And it brought tremendous clarity. It's still a path that I'm walking on because of that first experience with Cecil. And so I've definitely seen the value of having simple tools that help point people in the right direction. Jim, I know you've got similar stories. So what would you want to share about your background with tools?
Into the Harvest is a nonprofit ministry made possible by generous partners who believe Jesus is alive today and still calling people to follow him. Their monthly support helps disciple making grow and thrive around the world. If Into the Harvest has made an impact in your life and you want to help share the good news of Jesus with others, join us today and become a monthly giving partner. Visit intotheharvest.org/give.
Yeah, that's such a great story. And I think we've all seen people with aha moments from a simple tool. I mean, I think about genius as being able to take a complex concept and boiling it down to simplicity without losing its DNA, right? And so when I first saw the navigator's wheel illustration, and it showed me, oh, these are the primary elements of having a relationship with God. I need to be in the Word, not because I'm just supposed to, but it's the way I hear from him. And my prayer life is the way I talk back to him. It was like, wow. And then it kind of gave me a way to order all the relationships in my life. Are they believers or are they lost? And I relate to them differently based on that. And it capped it all off with Christ being the centerpiece of that, and my walk of obedience in applying these things. It helped me. It really helped me begin to walk with Jesus consistently. I'd heard my whole life, you need to have your own relationship with Jesus. And I'm like, I don't even know, that was just a cliche until I saw that. And so that's what snaps into mind, like, for me, when I first got that illustration, and it really helped me a lot. I don't even remember who shared it with me. It might have been Chuck Wood. It might have been Russ Perkins. I might have read it in one of the little Navigator Discipleship books or something. So, yeah, great tool.
Man, we're throwing out some legends on this podcast. Cecil, Chuck, Russ. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you so much that I don't know that I would say it exactly that way, that I have said it exactly that way, but I totally agree that the genius or the best teachers are the ones who are able to communicate profound truths. So what they're communicating is not simple. It's profound, but in simple ways. That is the great challenge for us as we grow as followers of Jesus and as teachers and as disciple makers, is we want to keep growing in the depth of our understanding of Jesus, the gospel, the scriptures, while at the same time growing in our ability to communicate that depth in more and more simple ways. And so it's awesome. Like, you're really growing in both directions. So tools can help you do that because they force you to think through, what is that principle that you were talking about earlier? What is the truth? But then how can I deliver that truth in a way that is true and true to the principle, but at the same time digestible for a young believer? So, man, I love that. It really points to what you were saying earlier about the idea of forms that help deliver those truths and those principles. So
I think the people that you have the gift of teaching when you see yourself able to do that really well. it's not just that you're a good learner to have the gift of teaching, but it's that you can learn a whole bunch of stuff and see all the nuance in it and the depth, but then you can make it pass onable. A developing teacher is interested in how well they communicate, and they have all this stuff to share. But a mature teacher is interested, am I communicating it to you in a way that's simple enough for you to pass it on? Because they want to empower the next believer. And so to come to the point of tools, like if you're committed to teaching to obey, you've got to be kind of super interested in your tools, because that's what's going to help you package it to pass it on. If you just want to be a disciple, you're not concerned about that. But if you want to make a disciple of someone else, the ability to pass it on is going to be forefront in your mind. And it becomes an issue of biblical stewardship. Am I stewarding the faith well? Am I thinking about how am I passing it on to the next generation? And we already named 3 people. The tool didn't slap us upside the head, by itself. It came, and the things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men. That's the verb in 2 Timothy 2:2. There's something that's being entrusted from person to person. And I would make a distinction between multiplication, which is passing on tools, and generations, which is passing on a lifestyle and the person of Christ. Yeah, and the multiplication of tools is usually the precursor to the generations of disciples that follow. And so you're probably going to need the first part if you're going to get to the second part.
I love that distinction. One more time, you said that multiplication is a matter of passing on the tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And spiritual generations is passing on
the
our
lifestyle,
way of life.
The lifestyle of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that a lot.
They come together usually.
They do. There should be a lot of overlap there.
Yeah.
One thing that I would encourage young disciple makers or young aspiring disciple makers, one way to think about this process, and this has been true in my own life, is think about it in 3 phases. And so phase 1 would be what I would just call stocking the toolbox. Begin collecting tools. And there's ways that we've tried to help people do that, but this podcast will be one of them. So we're going to give you some tools, and you can begin to stock your own toolbox just by learning these tools. But the second phase is really become more and more proficient using those tools, because the tools only have value if they're being used. And this second stage is really where you start to become a craftsman. So a craftsman isn't a craftsman simply because he has a toolbox full of tools. It's because he can pull those tools out and actually use them in the real world to accomplish something valuable. So that's phase 2, is learn how to practice using the tools and getting better at them. So all of this is going to be a process of growth. You're going to be learning more and more tools. You're going to be learning how to use them more effectively. And then I would say stage 3 is where you begin to learn how to create your own tools or put your own spin on the tools, just based on what you've experienced and learned in life. And so there's a really, I can be a Star Wars nerd. I'm not too bad.
I'm glad I'm not the one. Okay.
But I love in the original trilogy, so it's Return of the Jedi, where Darth Vader, he's there with his son Luke, and they've arrested Luke, so he's in handcuffs, I think. But Darth Vader turns on his lightsaber behind him. It's this real ominous scene because you're like, man, is he gonna kill him? And but he turns it on, and really he's admiring it. He's admiring the tool that, and he says, Darth Vader says, "I see you have constructed your own lightsaber. Your skills are now complete." And I know it's cheesy, but there's something true in there, that when you have the ability to go to the scriptures and begin to develop your own tools that help you effectively pass on the faith, it's a sign of maturity and your skills growing to completion. But we don't start there. And so if you're not there, that's great. Most people, or very few people, get there because they don't value tools. They don't collect them. They don't practice using them. So they never get to that third stage of actually developing their own tools that help them pass on the faith. But yeah, I would say, and if you apply that to a disciple maker or someone that you're learning from, then you want to get the tools that they're using, But then stage 2, you want to study how they're using the tool. And then, of course, you're going to be practicing it. So bit of a ramble, but any final thoughts on this?
What does it really mean to follow Jesus and help others to do the same? Discipleship 101 is a free 8-part video series with a downloadable guide designed to help you live as a disciple of Jesus and make disciples in everyday life. In it, we explore what discipleship is, why it matters, and how Jesus calls us to grow, endure, and multiply our faith. Whether you're mentoring one person or leading a group, this resource gives you clarity and practical steps to start right where you are. Visit www.intotheharvest.org/discipleship101 and take your next step as a disciple and a disciple maker.
Oh man, you sparked so many things with that for me. I do think that the stocking of the toolbox is really important, and really with someone who's an expert at those tools. I think it's a mistake to try to jump to phase 3 right out of the gate. Like, the way you learn to paint a Mona Lisa is by trying to copy the Mona Lisa over and over and over again. That's how you then you can recreate the Mona Lisa, but that still wasn't your own idea. But that's what it takes to be able to go paint the next, amazing painting. And the other thing, if you as a disciple maker, you've got to curate the tool set. You have to throw some of them away over time and be like, this one is not in the top. This is not in my top 100. It's got to go, right? And so I would say as a good disciple maker, you got to have like your top 6 to 10 things that you want to communicate. When we bring a soldier into the Army, we teach him to shoot his rifle a very specific way. Now, if we wanted to, we could be like, hey, we're going to teach you rifle ballistics. And you can go out and learn all the physics and everything, and you can go create your own rifle and shoot it, and then learn to shoot it however you want to. That would be a very slow way to begin to create competency in a soldier. Instead of like, yo, bro, we already made the rifle, shoot it like this, and you'll hit stuff. So, I mean, a big part of it is just copying the tools that have been curated for you in your context. I've got some friends, though, that have moved to Pakistan, and the tools I gave them here, and they're all changing, especially how they present the gospel. That's one of the tools that has to change the most when you change contexts. So yeah, I like those phases. They do require going in order. Put it together, practice it, then create your own.
Yeah, I like that. And I guess the sequence would be learn the tool as it exists, become expert at that, begin to modify it based on your needs. So I don't call it the pipeline, I call it the map to maturity, but there's a lot of similarity. And then, the third stage would be to begin to customize your own tools. But I really think, spend years in those first 2 stages. And the third one will just happen. It'll happen automatically because you become a craftsman. Well, let's talk about broad categories of tools. And so I would say, and we'll offer some suggestions in this, but so one category would just be evangelism. How do we communicate the faith to outsiders, and what are some tools that help us do that? A second broad category would be discipleship. How do we help a young believer really begin to grow in walking with Jesus and maturing in their faith? And then a third broad category of tools that maybe we'll touch on, that we'll give some examples of our favorites, has to do with leadership. How do we help people who are growing in their leadership in the church? So let's hear from you, Jim. What are some of your favorites in those different categories?
Yeah, and those are big buckets. So we could have some smaller buckets in there. I think the gospel one's really important to address. It hit me while I was studying Galatians. I think it's in Galatians 3. It might be verse 8, where it says, the gospel was preached to Abraham. And I was like, whoa, if he was hearing the gospel way back there in Genesis, then this idea of the gospel is not the bridge illustration that I got from the Navigators, which really focuses on substitutionary atonement, right? it is a massive idea. And then I'm reading Jesus, who's preaching a gospel of the kingdom. And the tool that I learned for the gospel, the bridge illustration, doesn't mention the kingdom at all, but the gospel of the kingdom is on every page. I'm like, there's the gospel is bigger than what I learned. And so everyone, but we're commanded to preach the gospel, to share the gospel, to communicate the gospel. So really, if you want to obey the command to share the gospel, then you have to truncate it, package it, put it into a tool somehow. And so we're all doing that. We're all using a tool. I like Robert Foster in his book, Celebration of Discipline. He says, we have a choice of liturgy, but we do not have a choice of whether to use liturgy. Now, when he says liturgy, he means forms and tools, right? So we're all, one of the kind of real pious ideas I hear sometimes is, oh yeah, I just go by the principles. I don't use any tools. And I'm like, well, then you never obey or apply a principle without a tool, right? So we have to pick a tool. And so the two kingdoms illustration for evangelism is one of my favorites because it emphasizes the gospel of the kingdom and trusting Christ as Lord as part of receiving the gospel. It doesn't mention whatever Abraham heard in Genesis. Like it intentionally takes that part out and all other parts, lots of other parts of the gospel. But that one has helped in our context because I don't need to spend much time, at least in my context, convincing people that they're sinners anymore, which was a big part of working with people in the 50s and 60s, getting them convinced that they're lost. I begin with a lot of people who know they're lost. So I spend more time on talking about what it means to trust Christ and enter the kingdom. So that's one of my favorites in that category. Was that the question I was supposed to answer? How'd I do?
Yeah. So you're saying that for communicating the faith with those who are not yet believers, outsiders, you have a tool called the two kingdoms. Yeah. That's great. And again, we'll you've got that on digits or something.
Yeah, we
got
that on digits. Yeah.
You may even have like a video that we could link.
We'll get the link in there. Yeah. Yeah. I guess another point about that is it was adapted from the bridge illustration. Because I'm sharing the bridge illustration and it wasn't communicating aspects of the gospel that were super relevant for my context. So I had to make some changes. So adaptation of tools over time. And that one took off. Not all the tools I've created have taken off. So
yeah. You also have a seed sower app. You want to give a few, and this is also directly related. So share how that fits with the two kingdoms.
Yeah. So the seed sower app is, a simple app that helps you track how you're doing sharing the gospel, who you're sharing it with. You can link your whole church together into it. So you can say, hey, wow, as a church, we shared the gospel so many times, and who we're sharing with. And you can, it'll send you reminders to follow up. So it's a tool that helps you steward your evangelism efforts and follow up with the right people. Pretty simple, couple of buttons. So check it out.
And that's available.
Feedback. Yeah,
Apple, Android,
and Android. Yeah, Google Play and in the App Store. So
try
it. It's another tool.
Well, and it pairs with the two kingdoms. But you could use it with other ways of sharing the gospel.
Yeah. Anywhere you share the gospel, you can use it to track your efforts. It's method of gospel sharing agnostic.
Yeah. Well, I agree with what you're saying about the gospel. In fact, I think the gospel is much more expansive than we tend to realize. So a lot of folks I've heard many times people will, I think, be reductionist with the gospel and they'll take something that's very true. It's actually scriptural. So 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul describes the gospel as Jesus died for our sins. He was buried. He rose from the dead. And that is absolutely the gospel. But it's what I would say at the heart of the gospel. But when I did a study on the gospel, I came away with this understanding. The gospel is God's message of good news concerning his son, Jesus. And you could just stop right there. That is what the gospel is.
Space, though, yeah.
Yeah, the gospel is God's message of good news concerning his son, Jesus, who he is, what he has done, what he is doing, what he will do, and how we can be part of it. So that's my that's as concise as I can get. This is what the gospel is. It's a message, God's message of good news, but it's message that centers on a person, God's son, Jesus. And then we can break that down further. We need to know who he is. We need to know what he has done, which is what I think 1 Corinthians 15 is telling us. Hey, this is what he's already done. But the gospel is also what Jesus is doing today. He's redeeming a people for himself. He's building the church. He's making us new creations. He's preserving the world. He's interceding for us. All of that is part of the good news that is centered on Jesus. So there's things that Jesus is doing today. Then there's things that are still to come. He's going to return. He's going to restore. He's going to resurrect. He's going to judge. He's going to set things right. So that's all part of the good news that's still to come that Jesus is going to accomplish. But ultimately, it's about how we can be part of it. And I think any good gospel presentation needs to focus on Jesus, help people see who he is and what he's doing, and then also call them to respond. So I use a simple illustration called the Lord Jesus Christ, and it's very much centered on Jesus, who he is, what he's doing, and then calling people to respond, to recognize and respond. So that's really the three steps of the gospel is God has to reveal himself, we have to recognize, and we have to respond. So that illustration is available in the book 3 of the Pathway series, Passing on the Faith, the Lord Jesus Christ. We also have a short video on that we'll link here in the show notes. So how about for discipleship, helping someone who is a believer start to really grow and mature? What's a favorite tool that you use for that, Jim?
Looking to take your first steps in following Jesus or help someone else do the same? Finding Faith is a free resource from Into the Harvest built around one short video and 3 simple lessons from Galatians 2:20. It's a practical way to explore the gospel and what it really means to live by faith in Jesus. Get it today for free at intotheharvest.org/findingfaith.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, I picked up this tool from a guy named Curtis Sargent, who's a missionary to China. It's called MAL. It stands for Model, Assist, Watch, and Leave. And it's the tool that helps you pass on tools. So if I have a tool I want to communicate to someone else to disciple them in, one of my top 10, one that's really important, let's say the 2 kingdoms illustration, I'm going to I'm going to model, here's how to share it. Then they probably won't be able to share it without me, so I'm going to assist them. And then without me, I'm going to step back and watch. And when I think that they've really got it well, I'm going to leave them to use that tool on their own. Because for me to continue to help them with it, I don't leave the relationship. I'm just like, I'm not going to watch you share the 2 kingdoms anymore. You got it. It's kind of a waste of my time. Now, there's other things I'd like to communicate. And so I take that little process, model, assist, watch, leave. And as I sit down with the disciple, I'm like, hey, have you learned this tool? Have you learned this tool? And I'm trying to communicate my top 10 things that I'm like, look, these are pretty foundational to helping you grow as a disciple. So I have a little MAL matrix, and our whole, our version of the Pathway series, we call it short-term discipleship, has about 10 things in it that we want to communicate. And at the end of it, you grade yourself. Do I need modeling? Like, I don't even know what this is. Do I need assisting, watching, or leaving? And so that's my tool to disciple others and try to pass on, my top 10 tools that I want everybody to know.
Yeah. Do you have things that we can link that people could explore?
I sure do. There's a couple things I put in some prep show notes already, and if you don't get them, we'll put it in there. But yeah, it's a really an interesting process when you sit down with those that you're discipling and ask them, hey, how am I? It's feedback for you. How am I doing passing this on to you? Do you need me to model it again? Do you need assisting, or can you do it and I'll watch you? And my goal is to get everybody to at least to watch on the top 10 things that are most important, like how to share the gospel, the 2 kingdoms is what I use. So leave takes a little while longer, and we could talk more about passing on tools and that and some of the dynamics in there. But yeah, that's mine. I wonder if map to maturity, where does that fit in your discipleship? Is that one of your top things for discipleship?
So that's actually, I would put that in the leadership development track, even though I think it was super helpful for me as someone who was brand new, because it kind of presented the big picture. I think it's been a great tool to help young leaders keep their bearings as well, to kind of know and to be able to discern, where is this person at that I'm reaching out to, and thereby plotting the best way to help them and encourage them without expecting more than the person can respond to in that moment. So I'll link that as well, the map to maturity. So that'll be mine for the leadership. For discipleship, for helping someone get started, probably my favorite tool, man, this is a tough one because there's a few, but definitely one that I've been using consistently for years now, and more frequently recently, is the 3 measures of devotion. And this is a simple tool to help people understand where to start if they want to live a life of devotion to God. There's a verse in Proverbs 20, verse 6 that says, many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy person? And what that's getting at is we all think we're doing, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us think that we're doing better than we are. And so the 3 measures of devotion gives you a non-subjective way of measuring your devotion. And so, but the way I set this up, again, this is in book 3. So I guess I'm going to be pushing book 3, Passing on the Faith. But it's actually, the whole point of book 3 is it's a book of tools. So if folks are interested, then they can check that out. But this one, 3 measures of devotion, is in there. And the way that I present it is I ask people, how many verses do you think are in the Bible? And it's just kind of a fun trivia question. And of course, I've looked it up, so I know that there's a little over 31,000 verses in the Bible. And the Bible says that all of those verses are inspired by God and profitable for me. So they all have importance because they came from God and they're valuable for me. But that's a lot of verses. So what if I told you that I could give you 3 verses, just 3 verses from the teaching of Jesus that would help you understand what it means to be a disciple, what it means to really love God, and what it means to do something great with your life? Would you be curious to know what those 3 verses are? And of course, no one's ever said no. Because one, it's Jesus. So what did Jesus say? And then it's just 3 verses. And these are pretty interesting things. Well, what did Jesus say it took to be a disciple? What did Jesus say it looked like to love God? What did Jesus say it looked like to do something great with your life? And so the 3 measures of devotion really helps set not just the direction, but I find that it's a great tool for inspiring people. And I do think that tools are about more than just educating, that tools need to inspire people to a deeper devotion. The best tools will do that. And I think Jesus's tools do that. If you look at his parables, they weren't just theological ways of communicating theology. There was almost always a response, a deeper response that was being called for by Jesus. And so I think 3 measures has been a great tool, even for non-believers, for people that are just kind of seeking to learn more about Christianity. It's a great tool to get them started on that. So that's one that I use. How about for leadership for you? I've kind of already given mine, the map to maturity, but what do you like to use?
Yeah. I think the thing that has been, 2 come to mind, but I'll give you the first one, is the thing that we've most used is our multiplication strategy. So we're trying to multiply simple house churches. And we use the verse, I've heard you use this a lot, Mark 3:14. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. And so I have found, as I'm trying to develop disciples, I want them to be in church with me, and other ways with me. I have a guy living in my home right now. I, do a lot of stuff together. So I want them to be with me, but I also want to send them out to preach. And so as they try to go out and start the next gathering of disciples, all kinds of things happen for them. They bump into all kinds of failures and some successes, and then I want to bring them back. And so that process of this might even be a function of growing disciples, but man, the process of spending time with me and with Jesus really, but with me as a disciple maker, learning what I've learned about Jesus, and then being sent out to try to apply it and going back and forth between those two things, man, that develops leaders. We have a friend that says, responsibility is like fertilizer for leadership development. So the responsibility of going out there and find someone else you can teach, that will grow a leader. So, yeah.
That is great. That is such a great point. We're having conversations about that locally here in our church. Sometimes there can be hesitation to give responsibility to young leaders because you're concerned that they're going to mess it up. And the truth is they will. They're going to mess it up. So, but the point is, it's kind of like I was talking with my friend and our pastor, Shelton. He's been on the podcast quite a bit. But as we were talking about this, it's, as a parent, you kind of understand it, because if you teach your kid to walk, they might skin their knee. They might even break their leg. But you should teach them to walk. So, in fact, you just expect it. Like, yes, if you help people grow, the growth process means that there will be mistakes, there'll be hurts that happen. But parenting means that we're sticking with people through those things. And I think if you come from a background where you're not really doing life on life discipleship, and your mindset is we're going to make disciples through a program, or we're going to send people off to higher education to make them leaders, and then we put them over a church and then they blow up the church. Like, yeah, that's not a good model, because you didn't actually walk with them through the development, making all of those small course corrections so that when they became leaders, they had all of that reference data in their soul that helps them be godly leaders and lead well. So it kind of I'm going off on a tangent here, but I love that principle of leadership that you're articulating.
Yeah, well, you're giving me a little bit of PTSD, because I'm not only teaching a kid to walk, I'm teaching a kid to drive right now. And so, there's much greater risk involved if there's an accident, right? But I don't want to put her and be like, well, you're never going to learn to drive. It's just too risky. What kind of parent would I be? Yeah, it's really interesting about developing leaders. And this saying is a tool you can use, but the way we want to develop leaders is we want them to grow into position. We don't want them to go into position. So if you're thinking normally like I'm going to hire a new pastor to come take over my church, and he's just going to go into that position. Boy, yeah, you're assuming probably more risk than you should. But if you're like, hey, young man, I want you to go start a Bible study, and his first night out, he's not going to get a congregation of 200 sitting there that he can blow up. He's going to get a congregation of 2. And so any mistakes you make are going to be pretty minimized, and that's where he learns to cut his teeth little by little.
And that's the value of the life on life that you were talking about earlier. So, well, man, we could talk probably indefinitely, guys. No doubt. We could just go down the list of tools. We've just tried to highlight a few that we use most frequently, that we've seen to be most helpful. Jim, I'll give you the last word here. What are some warnings about trying to get more out of tools, taking tools, too much hope, too much trust in them? What are your thoughts about how we can make too much of tools and miss deeper truths and principles?
Yeah, I think you have to first admit that all of your tools are truncations. Right. Like we talked about the gospel, like I am not communicating how the gospel was shared with, I don't know anybody, Galatians 3:8, right? The gospel was preached to Abraham. I don't know anybody that talks about that aspect of, I think it has to do with I'll make you a father of many nations. That is part of the gospel, right? I don't know anybody that includes that in their presentation. So if I think that my tool is the be all end all and it is comprehensive, I probably have overestimated how good a job I'm doing, communicating something. And it's interesting that's actually the best tools that are most often confused with the principle. I'll give you an example. The command of any disciple is to abide in Christ. Boy, if you don't want to do that, that's all of us are about that. In John 15, one of the tools that helps me abide really well in Christ is getting up in the morning, reading my Bible, and praying, the daily quiet time. And it helps me abide so well that I hear people talking about my abiding time, as if that was the only time that they abided in Christ in the morning, right? So you've got to be careful that your tools don't become the principle, because that's the road to legalism, insisting on a tool to accomplish a function.
Man, that's a great warning. In fact, the mental picture that came into my mind as you were sharing was, tools are like a doorway. They usher us into deeper truths, or a place of deeper practice, deeper abiding in that particular scenario. But it's just a door. So the whole value of it is if it helps move us where in the direction that God wants us to go, or it deepens our understanding of what God has already accomplished and already declared to be true. So that's a good one, man. I guess I said I'd give you the last word. I'll share one little warning, is that, passing on a tool or teaching a tool is not synonymous with making a disciple. And I think this goes back to the point you made about multiplication versus generations. So sharing a tool can greatly help me communicate and pass on the faith. But, tools are just one part of the process that God calls us to in terms of sharing our lives. And we've talked about this verse from 2 Timothy 3, verses 10 and 11. But you see there 9 things that Paul passed on to Timothy. The first one was his teaching. And so we're going to teach, and we're going to pass on tools, which go beyond teaching. I think tools also can be practices. But ultimately, we want to pass on our faith, our way of life, that lifestyle that you were talking about earlier. And that requires much more than just sitting down and working through a tool with someone. So, Jim, this has been great having you on again. Always fun to chat with you. And, we're on other sides of the country, but if we lived closer, we would get a chance to hang out a lot more. In the meantime, these are always encouraging times for me just to connect with you and chop it up. So thanks for coming on, man.
It's been great. Thank you for having me.